Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for coming this afternoon. My name's Don Lathrop, and I'm a pediatrician, and I was Niels' associate from 1974 until I retired in 2000, and then, of course, Niels continued to practice and welcomed Anita Giavatti as his partner until he finally retired in 2006. So I've known Niels a long time. There's some other people from our office that have known Niels just as long a time. Mene Tosun is over there. Mene was Niels' medical assistant and then his bookkeeper for many, many years. And Janelle Kurtz and Jane Gibson were two of the other medical assistants in our office that knew Niels, and we all wanted to pay our respects. So thank you very much for coming. Lori Naiman, I hope you know, but maybe you don't. Lori has been Niels' very good and caring best friend for the last years and years of his life. They attended grand rounds at Packard Children's Hospital regularly every Friday, sitting in the same seats every Friday, so that they've become institutions and well recognized. So Lori, I'm going to ask you to come on and.
Thank you very much, Don. I guess I have the distinct privilege of knowing Niels the longest of anybody. We first met when we were pediatric residents at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto in 1959, which is a long time ago, over almost 60 years. We lost touch after that, going different ways, but we eventually stumbled on each other when I moved out to California. And he had already been here for several years, and we met at Packard Children's Grand Rounds. And since then, we've renewed our friendship, shared many dinners and vacations together, and got into the habit of going to indulge our movie affinity almost weekly and with dinners afterwards. So we got to talk about our pasts, our presents, our families, and it's been a true pleasure for me to have known Niels. As I'm sure all of you in the audience here, we have patients of his, former patients, colleagues in practice, colleagues at Stanford where he served as a volunteer in the various clinics, and other friends, including a few Danes. In fact, we have a cousin of his, Elizabeth von Rosen, who you'll hear from shortly, who came over from Copenhagen to be present today. Between her and Niels, I've gotten to know quite a bit about the family. I would encourage you, when you have a moment, to read the messages from various friends and family members who could not attend, and there are many more whose messages aren't here. But among the documents on the wall is a family tree showing some of Niels' distinguished ancestry going back over 100 years, including Dr. Harold Hirschsprung, who most pediatricians will know as the person who first described the disease named after him among infants with peculiar difficulty in moving their bowels and developing distended abdomens as a result. He has a number of distinguished artists in the family, and there is a museum in which some of them are displayed in Copenhagen called the Hirschsprung Museum. But before I continue, I'd just like to say we all have our warm and serious and funny memories of our experiences with Niels. I'll just share one of mine that stuck with my wife and I. As we all know, as we get older, and Niels has suffered that more than all of us, I think, in the last 8 months, to the point where his memory loss was a terrible handicap, and he was having difficulty driving. We often talked about how difficult it would be for a person living alone not to be able to drive in an area like this where there's very few places where you can go to by foot. And it was obvious among friends that Niels was having difficulty driving. And the big and painful question was, how do we get him to give up his license? And none of us wanted to be the person who did that. However, one day I got a call from his cardiologist, Clayton Bavor, who's here today, that Niels had driven to the office for his usual checkup, but Dr. Bavor said Niels could not drive home. And he made it pretty clear without any question. So that evening, my wife Judy and I had planned to meet with Niels for dinner at a nearby Chinese restaurant. So we had to take 2 cars to get Niels, one to drive his car, one to drive my own back. We got to the office, and Niels saw Judy with an expression of great relief on his face. He says, I guess it finally came to this, and he was almost very relieved. So we each drove my car, and Judy drove Niels's car, and we met at the restaurant. And after dinner, we had to figure out how to get Niels home in his car and my car. So I said, Niels, why don't Judy will take your car over to my house. I'll drive you home. And he said, okay. I knew I was taking advantage of him at the time. So I drove him home. Judy took his car to my house, and that was the last he drove his car. We subsequently asked his neurologist to declare that he shouldn't be driving, and Niels accepted that with mixed feelings, obviously. But ever since then, when he referred to Judy and I, he referred to us as his friends, the car thieves. So that's a typical Niels expression. I'm sure anybody who's been with him has similar stories to tell. Okay, I'm going to be speaking again later, but I'd like to introduce some of the scheduled speakers. Each has been limited to 45 minutes. After that, we're going to have an open microphone for anyone who would like to say a few words. So I'd like first to introduce Dr. Anita Javardi, who did much of the work for this reception. She's the woman who took over his pediatric practice. Before I go any further, I think all of us, on behalf of Niels, owe a great debt of thanks to everybody who played a role in helping Niels to remain in the comfort of his home. Those of you who've been to his home know what a wonderful place that has been for him. And it has been a difficult challenge for someone with Parkinson's and an affinity to fall and memory problems. But particularly, I'd like to thank Kent Sessions, who's in the audience here, and he'll be speaking shortly. Could you just stand up for a second, Kent? Kent. Kent did most of the heavy lifting in terms of adapting the house for Niels and his difficulty getting around and helping to repair damage and many things like that. Tex Cummings, his financial manager and executor, could you stand up, Tex, who made sure that there were sufficient funds to cover all of the costs of the various caregivers and household expenses. Lali Martinez, one of his caregivers, who Niels fell in love with. She, as you'd expect, and I think she must have had a crush on him too, because they got along beautifully. And for Niels, who's a guy who lives very privately, and is not happy about having people intrude on his privacy, to welcome this lovely young woman, a mother of a 3-year-old, to his house 3 days a week to help tidy up, to help cook a few meals, to smile at him periodically. That was a wonderful, uplifting comfort for him. I'm sure there are others here. Many of you who have sent your supporting feelings and condolences along the way, and we're all very grateful for that. Niels' last few days were very difficult, but I don't think he was in pain. He was kept comfortable through a variety of assisted devices in the home and medication, and I think he died quite peacefully. And we're all grateful for that, and thank everybody who played a role in that. I'd like to ask Anita Javardi to say a few words.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out. I know we would have loved to meet on a happier occasion, but I think Niels is here with us, and he'd be so happy to see everybody talking about him. I mean, this would have been just amazing. He would have loved it. And I think for those of us that knew him intimately, there are a couple of things that we all know about him. One, he was the sharpest dresser ever and had the best fashion sense. And of course, his killer, infectious laugh. He would laugh and he could set the room off. And I know he's laughing at me right now because this is the jacket I wore for his retirement party, and I have never worn it since because he said it was most unbecoming of me. He hated it. So I put it away, and I had to dig through today to find it because, I know he's laughing. So, but thank you again so much, and I'm really, really privileged to have taken over his practice, and his legacy lives on in the practice with Mine and myself. Again, thank you again for including me in your lives and including Niels in your life, because I think it's an honor and a privilege to be among people that love you unconditionally, no matter what, and no matter how many years have gone by. So thank you again very much.
I'd like to ask Kent Sessions to say a few words. Kent is the father of some young boys who were former patients of Niels.
Big young boys, men now. Hi, I'm Kent Sessions. So nice to see some of you and meet some of you. Niels was a pediatrician, connected to medicine, of course. He was a pediatrician for 2 of our kids for, almost 30 years now. And, on the occasion, and Niels and my wife, Mano, shared the same birthday. So we'd oftentimes celebrate birthdays together and then holidays and so. And last summer, it was getting clearer and clearer, as Lori described, that he was going to need some help. He was going to need some serious help. And so we did that. And it was most important to me, and I think most important to Niels as well, that he could stay in his house. He was clear that he did not want to be kind of in an institution just for his own. His house was his private place. It was a place of restoration and laughter and friendship and celebration. So I was so grateful that we could actually work it out that he could do that. So I have a couple things. I have one as a book, Khalil Gibran, that was one of Niels' books, and it's just a small poem. Then Almitra spoke, saying, "We would ask now of death." And he said, "You would know the secret of death. But how shall you find it unless you seek it in the heart of life? The owl, whose night-bound eyes are blind unto the day, cannot unveil the mystery of light. But if you would indeed behold the spirit of death, open your heart wide into the body of life. For life and death are one, even as the river and the sea are one. In the depth of your hopes and desires lie the secret knowledge of the beyond. And like seeds dreaming beneath the snow, let your heart dream of spring. Trust the dreams, for in them is hidden the gate to eternity. Your fear of death is but the trembling of the shepherd when he stands before the king, whose hand is to be laid upon him in honor. Is the shepherd not joyful beneath his trembling, that he shall wear the mark of the king? Yet is he not more mindful of his trembling? For what is it to die but to stand naked in the wind and to melt into the sun? And what is it to cease breathing but to free the breath from its restless tides, that it may arise and expand and seek God unencumbered? Only when you drink from the river of silence shall you indeed sing. And when you have reached the mountaintop, then you shall begin to climb. And when the earth shall claim your limbs, then you shall surely dance. And by the way, just so we're all clear, Niels was an atheist. Just got to say that. But he did enjoy this book. He did enjoy this book. Two more things. This morning I went just to collect some things from the house to bring, kind of share some of the things from his life. And I found a card from him on one of his tables near his nightstand. And it's just a list of things. It's his writing, and it's a list of things. The first one is acceptance. The second is patience. The third is compassion. The fourth is love. And the fifth is mind your own business. And then on the other side it says, be bold. Be bold. And then finally, just a story about, and thank you, Anita, for setting it up. So it's hard to get older, and it's hard to deal with walkers, and the house is not in order and everything else. And so, he's wearing his pajamas a lot towards the end of his life. And one pair in particular was his favorite pair, but it was getting a bit ratty. It was a little too much. So I was like, okay, Niels, that's it. We're getting you new pajamas. So one of the helpers went, and she went shopping and got him some nice new pajamas. And she brought them back, and she hemmed them to make sure they were exactly the right height. And then I believe it was Lolly, wasn't it Lolly, ironed the pajamas for him so they looked fresh and nice and orderly. And so that evening, we're getting him all organized and got his pajamas on, his new pajamas on. And we're like, well, so Niels, what do you think of the new pajamas? He says, oh, yes, they're fine. And then he says, well, if you must know, the squares are a little large for my taste. Because, of course, his old pajamas were from Nordstrom's, and the new pajamas were from Target. So the square's a little bit larger. So anyway, thank you so much for coming, and definitely be around to talk if you want to afterwards.
Thank you, Ken. The next speaker is Elizabeth von Rosen, who is a cousin on Niels' mother's side, the Nathan side of the family. And Elizabeth, where are you? Oh, there you are. She's going to speak twice. The first time to bring a message from a longtime close friend of Niels named Mikael Okenholt.
My dearest Niels, I can't be with you today, so I'll let Elizabeth speak for me. You have been one of my closest friends for 45 years. We met on a summer day in '71, a day just as sparkling as you, full of sunshine and joy. I was 24 and you were 42, and since then, we have seen each other every year. You came to Denmark every summer, and I came to California many times. So I have met many of your friends. Some of them are dead, but some of them are present right now and know what an unusual and joyful person you were. When I met you, I found the ideal man in many ways. In short, your culture and the way you treated other people, patients and friends, always seeing the positive aspects. You taught me indirectly how art and life is. I simply copied your taste and style, couldn't imagine anything better. In your young days, you worked in the States, Boston, St. Louis, and Stanford. Then you returned to Sweden and Denmark. In '74, you got the chance to return to your beloved California, and you went. And you said more or less goodbye to your beloved Denmark. It was not an easy decision, having two cultures so deeply rooted. But California is in many ways a paradise on earth. That was you, and you chose right. And your life in Los Altos became a blooming success. Patients, friends, neighbors, culture, nature. In the 2-3 years, your health started to weaken. We, your friends, saw it, and we started to worry. Fortunately, I could take some holiday around Easter, and I came over as many times before. And we had some meaningful and wonderful days together. We could talk and walk and remember a smile at the past. And your unique sense of humor was intact, so lots of laughter. However, you also told me that you did want to die. You felt that life was over. In your last weeks, you had your friends around you and 2 excellent caregivers. And I think that you died peacefully. And now you're coming back to Denmark, your native country, and we'll put you in your family grave next to your parents and brothers. And I'll go there, and if I concentrate, I think I can see your smile and hear your voice, and I'll bring all the memories to life. So thank you so much for taking me into your world, Michael.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. Our next speaker is a colleague from Packard Children's Hospital in Stanford, Dr. Darrell Wilson, Professor of Pediatrics.
Good afternoon, and it's an honor to be able to present at this memorial service for Niels on behalf of the Endocrine Division. Niels did some research fellowships at Stanford, at the old Children's Hospital at Stanford, actually long before I got there. But for about the last 3 decades, would come 2-3 times a month to the endocrine clinic and kind of hang out with us and have a great time. So we started inviting him to our parties and had a marvelous time with him. I had an opportunity to travel a bit with him, and I think one of the things I had always known that he was a very sophisticated traveler, a very experienced traveler. But traveling with him, you also got the almost unexpected pleasure of his wonderment at things, that no matter where you went, he would find something enjoyable or fun to do with it. We have a fairly raucous midwinter holiday tradition party that involves gift exchange that can get fairly exciting. And one year, against my advice, people were exchanging gift cards because it seems like not a very sophisticated thing. But midway through the party, Niels started claiming the Target card. And he said, I don't know what Target is, but it must be important if so many people want the card. So there's kind of a loop back to the pajamas. Niels did have a marvelous house, and we were graced with invitations on occasion. we were able to celebrate Laura Backrack and my promotion party at his house. Always very nice. I'll end with a few other anecdotes. His go-to food for parties was a cognac fourgras that was just fantastic. Way too rich, but very nice. Rajiv Kumar reminded me that we had some years ago a Danish family had just moved to the area when their young daughter was diagnosed with diabetes, and she spoke essentially no English, and Niels gracefully spoke for her for a number of hours and really got that family settled. It was very nice. And I was visiting my grandchildren this weekend, and my daughter reminded me, she said, you know, when I first met Niels, after I had talked to him for about a half hour, her only thought was, gee, I wish he was about 35, 40 years younger. It would have been great. He was just a joyous, very supportive colleague, very good with the trainees, and just, we will miss him. I particularly miss him at Grand Rounds, where we sit up in whatever that section is. But it's been a joy to work with a guy that's so honorable, such a gentleman, such a marvelous guy. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Dr. Anders Dahlstrom, who is from a neighboring country, but living in California.
Thank you very much for inviting me, everybody, and for your fantastic care of Niels, the Troika, and many others. I was unfortunately out of Californian town when he passed away. But I have a lot of memories, and I will share some of them with you. We met the first time in 1992 when I was invited as a visiting professor at Karolinska Institute and came from Karolinska in Stockholm. We became friends right away, actually very easy with Niels, with his Scandinavian background, half Swedish, half Danish, and also for a lot of other reasons. Here are just a few of them. He had an absolutely impressive medical clinical background like nobody else I met. He had worked at the University of Hospital in Copenhagen and in Gothenburg University, and he also had training in the U.S. at there's I think it was a hospital on the East Coast called Harvard, and also at Toronto Children's Hospital, which in Europe was the best of all children's hospitals as far as we knew over there. And he also went to St. Louis Hospital, and when he came back to Denmark, this is just a little sidestep, when he came back to Denmark and asked for promotion because he had been at Harvard and Toronto and St. Louis, and then his professor said that I wish you had stayed longer in St. Louis, then we could have use of you. That's a very typical Swedish, Danish, passive-aggressive way of welcoming home people that learn things abroad. And finally, he also came to Stanford, and we heard from Daryl that he was there a lot as a volunteer, and I'm sure also part of the brain what do you say, brain craft? No, but people with brains in that section in too. And later in private practice with Dr. Lathrop, and later with Dr. Yuvadi, and had a fantastic career. He sent me, as I'm a pediatric gastroenterologist, he sent a patient once, and I never got any referrals back because he took care of them after that, which was his way of learning and doing things the right way. He also had the most diverse and absolutely stunning cultural background and knowledge. I've never known anybody during my 35 years in medicine it's not only innings and who's batting fastballs, etc. From not 49ers, it's Giants, but also a lot of other things. And I have just a few here also. And he also has the most interesting family history, as you already heard from Elizabeth. And in medicine, his father was a well-known physician, and you already heard about Hirschsprung, which is in pediatric gastroenterology, an unbelievable person from surgeon, and who invented this new way to save newborn lives by specific surgery so they can poop, and otherwise they will die. And so, in his lovely home, he had, as you already saw in this picture, a table, Hirschsprung's original table, which was, and also a lot of his medical equipment that he still had there was absolutely interesting for a gastroenterologist. He also, his cultural, as you already heard also, had a lot of interest, and being a connoisseur of ballet, and through his mother's, Elsa Marianne von Rosen, everybody knew her. She was a big star in Sweden, and at the Royal Opera House in Sweden, and that was very closely related, obviously, to that side of the family. And he loved ballet and knew everything about it. And to the other extreme, which was circus, he was also closely related to the family Schumann, who was the most famous circus family. And they had a clown that was my favorite as a child, Charlie Rivel, who was part of that family. And so it was just enormous amount of diversity in its cultural background. And not absolutely to mention arts. His dad, he had many painters and sculptors in his family, and the one who went to his lovely house, he had paintings all over the walls from relatives, and also sculptures that are very famous for at least us in Scandinavia. And we both shared a big interest in opera and classical music, and we went together several times in San Francisco and San Jose Opera before I moved down to Monterey, which made it a little bit, it was more difficult to actually find the connection. But it was wonderful to sit in his perfectly designed, almost Eichler-like house, of course, drafted and made up by one of Denmark's most famous architects, and the one who's been there. It was a stunning house from an architectural point of view. And sitting there with a glass of wine, listening to the CD of the month that he always had, and it was wonderful memories. He was also, as we already also heard, a very good swimmer, 1,000 yards or meters every weekday, actually, till he could only swim 500, which is an enormous distance for a person that's over 80 years old. And he did that to just a few weeks, I heard, before he passed away. 3 weeks before he died, I came up from Monterey, and we went out to his favorite Chinese restaurant on El Camino Real, and for the first time with his walker, so he obviously did quite fine, but he had fallen a lot before that, and his Parkinson had deteriorated. It was the first time he told me also that that was very difficult not to be able to care for himself, and also be dependent on other people in his own home 24 hours a day. And for the first time, he also told me that he was afraid of dying alone in some nursing home. And I was so relieved when I heard by his old friends and co-workers, close friends, that Niels had passed away the way he actually wanted to, in his home, in his lovely home, with his dearest friends and co-workers being there, holding his hands. So I would miss him a lot.
we're near the end of the scheduled speech talks, but I'd like to recount an experience in the last few days. If you've been watching the slideshow, there was a photo of Niels lying down on his lounge on the patio of his home, enjoying the sun. And he was very peaceful at the time. And shortly after that, he became very agitated and required a strong sedative. And then he lapsed into semi-coma. This was about 3 days before he died. And he remained in his bed, not eating, drinking, or taking medications. About a day before he died, his cousin Elizabeth called from Copenhagen, and she had just received one of the near final messages I had sent to so-called friends of Niels, in which I felt that Niels was in semi-coma, was not likely to last long. She called about 5 in the morning, and the only person there was Niels's caregiver, Africa Morales. And she said she needed to speak to someone. And Africa called Kent and called me. And we were there shortly around 7:30. I should also mention another Danish friend of Niels who lives nearby, Mogens Lawrence, who's here today, who was in the last few days of tremendous help, sleeping over at Niels's home to help the caregiver if anything happened that was beyond her capability. Well, Africa called us. We came over. I saw Niels. He was barely conscious. He would, if I asked him to squeeze my hand, he would, but he couldn't talk. And Africa had told Elizabeth to call back when we were there. So she called and spoke to Kent. And she was anxious to fly over. And we felt that Niels was not going to last long. It would be not advisable for her to do that. But she was very distraught. Knowing that Elizabeth had difficulty with English on the phone, they suggested a Skype call. So Kent called Elizabeth on Niels's laptop and spoke with her and did his best to help assure her that Niels was comfortable and that all was being done, and there was not wise for her to come over. But he gave up and handed the laptop to me, and I listened to Elizabeth, and I didn't accomplish much. But then I said, Elizabeth, would you like to visit Niels on Skype? And she said yes. So I took the laptop to Niels's bedside, in which pointed the screen and the webcam towards Niels. And then I just sat there while Elizabeth, her face filling the screen, spoke in Danish to him very softly, words that I did not understand. But within a minute, Niels, who had his eyes closed, his eyes opened up and he stared at the screen and intently listening to what she had to say. And I'm sure, and after that, after the call, he lapsed into coma again. And within a day, he had died. But those last few words and sights of a cousin who he cared greatly for must have left him with a very warm and happy last experience of life on this earth. And for me, it was an amazing experience to see how technology that a lot of us use to keep in touch with faraway children, family, friends, can be used to help provide comfort at the bedside of a dying patient when they are not able to visit each other, and I found it very moving. I'm going to ask Elizabeth now to say in English what she said to Niels at that time.
Yeah. Hi again. Finally, I can speak like myself. Thank you, Laurie. And thank you, Anita, for making this. I'll pay you back, because what I wear today is a blue color. And this scarf, my mother, who was a dancer, got from King Nero in the end of the 50s when she danced in India. So I was really happy and grateful that I could see Niels in the last hours of his life. I'll also pay back to Laurie and say, yeah, perhaps you're the person who knew him longest, but I'm the person who knew him all my life. I'm 53. I'm a granny. Wow. So when I saw Niels's face, I just said to him, hi, Niels, this is Elizabeth. And then suddenly after, he opened his eyes. And I said, well, breathe deeply now, because soon you're going away. And I said, I tried to calm him down, but I could see he was very peaceful. So I said, well, promise me that you know that you've been loved and you had a rich life, a wonderful long life, and there's nothing to cry for. And remember to give your regards to your mother and father, who was my grandparents in a way, because they took care of me as a child. And remember to say hello to my daddy and my mother, who died 1.5 years ago, and all the others, your brother, everybody we know, and I'm sure you're going to have a great party up there. So this is celebration of life, but it's very close to death, because we're all going the same way. So let's make the best out of it while we can, and use Niels as a big inspiration for us all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This brings back one story that Niels shared with us about his maternal great-uncle Harold Hirschsprung, the famous one in the family. In his later years, Hirschsprung had what at the time was called cerebral sclerosis and was confined to a nursing home, and his caregiver, named Kristen Anderson, spoke often with him. And she asked Dr. Hirschsprung, and they knew that he was going to die, says, when you die and you go to heaven, I would like to ask a favor. And he said, sure. And said, when you go there, could you say hello to all of my relatives? And Dr. Hirschsprung said, my dear, I'm afraid I don't have enough time. Anybody who knows Anderson is like Smith in this country, so there are millions of Andersons up there. And Dr. Hirschsprung, the senior, was well aware of that and manifested some of Niels' keen sense of humor, which filtered down well. What I'd like to do is, before we adjourn for refreshments, anyone who has a few short comments that they'd like to share, we encourage you strongly to come up and say. Iris? Would you like to? Iris Litt is a pediatrician, a colleague, longtime colleague of Niels, and a good friend of both of us.
Well, this is on a lighter note, but I would love to share our experience when my late husband and I were visiting in Copenhagen. Niels encouraged us to visit his parents, which of course we were delighted to do. And when we got there, we had the address and directions, and we had difficulty finding being sure that we were in the right place. And suddenly I heard the peals of laughter, and it was Niels' laugh. And I turned to Vic and I said, yes, we're in the right place. So just to know that that incredible laugh was probably genetic. But, well, we will all miss him very much.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Ken Adams, and my mother was Pauline, and she was one of his best friends. They were very, very close, so I've known him since I was 9 or 10, and she named her pet squirrel Niels. And we had a lot of great times. Visit him in Copenhagen or Sweden or wherever it was where he lived. And I remember he had a little green Volvo. It didn't look like anything from the outside, but it had a stick shift. And that was the coolest thing in the world. So I credit him with my taste in cars, which has been reliability and a stick shift is all I want, no flash. I got more, but that I think I wanted to say that something about the squirrel named Niels and the stick shift. He was a great friend over the years. He was there, like when my dad died, he came to my daughter's high school graduation. And I don't remember, even in the most serious of times, talking about the most serious things, never did I experience from him or even witness anything of what, I don't know how this thing's working, of what we call negativity nowadays. He didn't have any negativity in him, not to share with anybody anyway. Maybe it came out and some of you saw in the last days. I don't know anything about that stuff. When he called me a few months ago to ask for my sister's phone number, he just said that he'd been diagnosed with the Parkinson's and that he had had to give up his ballet and stuff. It didn't sound like he had any plans of dying soon. He was a wonderful, wonderful friend and a terrifically inspiring person to know. I'm glad I got here. Sorry I was late. I tried to be early, but I wasn't ready for the traffic from Santa Cruz.
Someone else?
My name is Tony Svensson. I am from Göteborg, the town where Niels spent quite a bit of time. And I probably have the distinction of having seen Niels naked more than anybody else in the room. Because we met probably 2 or 3 times on average, twice on average per week at the Stanford Pool, which is where I first met him in 1979, 1980. So I met him there and we started talking. At first he didn't hear my first name. He thought since I'm Swedish that it was Tommy, so he said, Tony, is it Tommy? No, it's Tony. So I told him the story about when I was first in the United States and I had met this old lady in Iowa who also asked me if my name was Tony, and she wanted my name to be Eric or Lars or something appropriately Swedish. But anyway, the joke that I told Niels and the joke that I will tell you is how this old lady looked up at me and said, Tony, how could your parents do that to you? Anyway, I knew Niels from not only from the pool, but also he came over mostly for Christmas events. And I remember sitting around the table with him and my family, our daughter, appropriately, he was our daughter's pediatrician, as well as our daughter's cousin's pediatrician. But I remember sitting around the table and just telling stories and jokes and belly laughing until almost your stomach hurt. So that was one side of him, the really very deeply humoristic side. The other side of him, which has been touched upon quite a bit, was the amazing amount of culture that came with the Niels Brandstrup package. He knew about art, he knew about literature. His family were friends with the Dinesen family, the Blix family, the list goes on and on. So he was truly a almost an encyclopedia of just about anything. And I just wanted to say that my family and I truly treasure spending time with him. The last time we saw him was this past Christmas, the day after Christmas Eve, when we actually had somebody drive him to our house. That was the first year he didn't have any snups. So we kind of got a sense that it was getting towards the end. But he was a great friend, and we will treasure him. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars.
One more, Lloyd. My name is Mogens Lauritsen, and I'm both a very good friend of Niels's. We go back to the middle 80s, and he was also the pediatrician for our 2 kids. And for me, Niels, we've heard many of his many great attributes here. One thing that we haven't really heard about is his observation skills and how meticulous he really was in his note-keeping. If you go through his home today, you will find books upon books upon books of his handwritten notes, really about anything. It could be his travels, letters to friends and family. And for me, I came across that really very early on and in a very unexpected way. I was with my son. Niels had referred us to an associate of Niels's for an ear, nose, throat condition. And I'm there in the consultation office with this other doctor, and all of a sudden this other doctor bursts into laughter. And I thought, this is a very serious matter with my son. What possibly could be funny? And then he says, well, here's the medical diagnosis that Niels made, and then it says, and down below, and the father looks very tired. Anyway, I will leave it at that. I do miss Niels terribly. He has been a wonderful friend through all the years.
Hi, everybody. I have known Dr. Brandstrup my whole adult life. I've worked for him since I was 19 years old. And then I was passed down to Dr. Javadi until the day he retired. I did not wear a shirt that said, I survived him when he retired, but I was probably the only person, he says, I'm going to consider you my granddaughter. We were family. He took care of me through a lot of hard times. My father had cancer. He took care of me through all the hardship. I'm sorry. He is more than someone I worked for. I've known him for 25 years. We have kept in close contact. I love him tremendously and respect him tremendously as a physician. He's an amazing physician. The world could fall apart, but if he had a patient that really need ultimate care, he would shut that door in front of everyone's faces and do everything in his power to make sure that patient was taken care of. And I think the reason why I've had so much loyalty is because there's a saying, they say, if you find your niche in life, and if you find happiness, and I respected him so much that I wouldn't trade anyone for him. I had other opportunities. Many people offered me other positions and jobs, but I was very bonded to his patients and to him, and I miss him tremendously. He feels like family to me. I just want to let everyone know. Loved him very much, and every time I think of things, I was kind of like his memory toward the end. I always wanted to make sure to remind him that all patients asked about him, that they loved him, and he would say, Mine, can you tell me stories about who this family was? And I go, oh, remember that family that bought you the wild geese and so forth, and just, little things like that, he would call me from home during maternity leave just to say, do you remember that patient? And I'd try to give a name to him, just kind of, and I was like, oh, thank goodness, Mine. We just visited him maybe 2 weeks before his death. I'm very sad that I couldn't make it. I didn't make it in time to visit him before he died, but I'm very honored to know him. Thank you very much.
Joanne Blessing Moore, a pediatrician colleague of Niels, and a Swedish compatriot.
He read all my Christmas cards that I couldn't read in the Swedish necessarily. It's just so important. Lori, thanks for taking care of everything. Thank you all. I think some of the notes up here are so wonderful because there's so many more people, including those in Sweden, that would love to be here right now. Those people that he accepted, that wanted him to come back and accepted their kids as his own family. So thanks, Lori, for including those special notes.
Anyone else? Phil, would you like to say a word? You, okay, Phil is speechless. Okay, I think we'll adjourn now and enjoy.
Just have one comment.
Oh, Anita.
Everybody said amazing things about him. I wanted to say one thing that I did not have the guts to tell him when he was alive. He was a terrible driver. Just awful. So we'd meet for lunch at least every couple of weeks, and the first couple of times I let him drive me, and we lurched along. And after that, I offered to drive. So, but Dr. B, I never had the guts to tell you that. So thank you. Please come enjoy some refreshments, and I think we'll move all the seats out so that people can mingle. Thank you very much.
We saved Niels' life and that of many others by encouraging him to give up his license. Let's enjoy some refreshments now and perhaps share other experiences. Thank you all for coming.